Happy Sunday, crypto community. Hope you're having a great day. I did say last night that I wasn't going to be creating any content today, but we got a pretty cool little podcast out from the Bank of International Settlements head of research, Hyun Song Shin. Now, Hyun is here on the podcast, on this podcast, to discuss big tech in finance, aka blockchain, in how it is going to be utilized by the financial industry, and how it's rapidly revolutionizing how the traditional financial industry is observing finance in a sense, right? So, with our little overview out of the way, let's jump straight into the podcast where we will be introduced to Mr. Hyun and learn the basics of what's going on right now.
Can you talk us through why and how big techs are getting into financial services?
Yes. The big tech's business model is to enable the direct interaction of the very many users that they have, and then to use the essential byproduct of that interaction, which is the data that they generate. And the data is used as an input into services that rely on the natural network effects among the users. And that begets more activity, which then generates even more data. So we have a full loop that goes from the data to the network effects to the activities. And we call it the data network activity loop, or the DNA loop. And this business model has enabled them to enter financial services using their existing platforms in social media, in e-commerce, and in search to give them really a head start.
So what financial services then have they started to provide? What can they offer that traditional...
So, real quick, let's just recap on all the jargon he threw out, right? Because, well, that made perfect sense to me. I'm sure that there's somebody out there that just heard, insert any language you don't understand, right? Ultimately, what he was pointing out is that data is money nowadays, right? That's why I'm able to make money on YouTube now, because I'm creating data that somebody out there, you, my viewer, finds value in, right? And so because you find value in it, you are now giving your attention to me, which allows YouTube to spam those ads that you see at the beginning, somewhere in the middle if I make the video too long, and somewhere at the end, right? So this feedback loop, as he actually referred to it as, I believe, is a positive feedback loop, because my contribution to this ecosystem draws you, a viewer, into the ecosystem, and thus it's growing. And my contribution to this ecosystem may inspire some of you to begin creating your own content. Maybe you're like, oh, this guy's terrible, I can do it so much better, so much more objectively, whatever your spin, your shtick is, that you think you can, your spin or stick you think you can put on, what I'm doing, and you could do it in your way, right? And that's going to, that whatever that notion is going to inspire you to become active in this network, and thus, therefore, you as this new individual in the ecosystem are going to attract even more new faces to pay attention to what you're saying now. You're generating data, I'm generating data, and now we both have more people watching both me and you now, right? And so that's this positive feedback loop that he's talking about, how it's ultimately pointing out the fact that, we're social creatures, and the internet is this, it's the biggest playground in the world, Everybody gets to come together and play, and we don't have to worry about anybody hurting us other than hurting our feelings usually, right? Because somebody wants to be triggered. But ultimately the idea is that this ecosystem that we've witnessed bloom from big tech companies is now facilitating a massive, economy inside of it. The Amazons, the Googles, the Facebooks of the world, and all the ad revenue associated with it, and sales associated with this massive thing. And now we're talking about how this new data system is moving forward in this second question, right? So hopefully that was a little bit more clear and general language for a lot of you out there that don't understand the business sense that he was just preaching there. But, hopefully, people will start being like, dude, stop even saying this stuff. we all get it now. We've all been listening to you for so long. We're hip to that jive, right? But if not, I do these really just so that I can help new people understand what's really going on here, right?
Banks and financial institutions can't, and what are their advantages?
Yeah, so they have used their traditional platforms to enter, for example, services and payments, and in some lending operations, as well as being a supermarket for savings products that other firms have offered. They have a business model that is low cost, easily scalable, and this has enabled them to provide financial services at low cost, especially for users who have traditionally been excluded from financial services due to the lack of documentation, due to a lack of collateral, and a distance from the bank branch network. So the upshot has been that this has provided financial services to a much larger group than has traditionally been possible. So the end result is that we have the two big advantages of efficiency of provision and greater financial inclusion.
Okay, so those are...
And so let's conclude what he's saying there, because again, it's a lot of technical jargon that even in my head's been for a few seconds there. It's strange sometimes listening to these people talk, right? Because it's almost as if they're speaking a foreign language, even though most of the words are just normal, English words. It's not even they're not even super large in context. It's just how they string them together. And so ultimately what he's pointing out is, again, that we're looking at this new emerging financial big tech industry that is being built on top of the one that I laid out for you that he had presented as first, answering the first question. And so in this, what he's saying is that, these new financial services are rising up as the next thing, the next big thing, and they're being facilitated through these trustless systems, or these trusted, however you want to describe what the blockchain is, how it requires no trust on your behalf because trust is baked into the blockchain pie, right? He's not using blockchain terminology. It's almost as if he was afraid that his words were going to be transcripted out and that could bring buzzwords from the crypto community in, but we're hip to that jive. We know what they're talking about now because we've been following them for months on months, right? Years, some people out here. It ain't working. We're seeing right through it. Oh, apologies. It's almost like we're back to the old days with me getting ads. Deeply sorry for that, sorry. But let's jump straight back in.
Clear advantages, but does the entry of big techs into the financial services industry also bring risks?
Yes, there are, and we can say that the risks fall into two broad categories. The first ones have to do with new elements. There are new examples of old themes that have to do with financial stability.
Just to be clear what he's talking about right now, if you missed the question ultimately is, what's the danger of Facebook and its new Libra coin? The fact that Facebook, a private company, is now developing its own financial solution outside of a third-party alternative, outside of... Really, this question is about outside the traditional financial system, but I think that we're going to see it evolve into, it's more so just an issue of Facebook having their own thing, their own currency that they are developing, as opposed to joining a third-party ecosystem, right? So the first thing is it's a threat to stability based upon, as Mr. Hyun pointed out, when you look at the historical precedents in regards to what Facebook's doing, there have been several risks associated, right? And I'm sure he's going to actually hopefully break down a few of those, I think. At least one.
But then there are also quite new elements that have to do with competition and data privacy. So let me just divide my comments into two. On the traditional financial stability issues, if you're worried about financial stability of solvency of institutions, lending standards, and so on, they have been covered traditionally in the old banking regulations, and to do with the soundness of the payment system. And elements of these themes also appear when there are big techs. So, for example, yes, there are clearly costs as well, and the costs fall under two broad categories. So one category are, if you like, new examples of very old themes in financial stability and financial soundness that have traditionally been the domain of financial regulators. But big techs also bring a new element, which have to do with competition and data privacy and the market dominance that arises from this DNA loop. Now, under the heading of the new examples of the financial stability type of concerns, one way of addressing them would be to expand the scope of existing regulations so that the same activity is covered under the same rules. So if you're essentially doing banking type activities, then you should be subject to banking rules so that we ensure a level playing field. Now, the new elements have to do with the specific elements that come with the data network activities loop, because they have traditionally been outside the domain of financial regulators. They've been more the domain of competition authorities and the data protection authorities. And here we have to take a more comprehensive approach where we take into account the fact that financial regulation type of mandates have to be considered alongside competition and data privacy.
So, he keeps saying data network, right? But his language seems to indicate that they're not talking about traditional data. That's what I'm hearing. I am not hearing him talk about the Internet of Information that we're all accustomed to, because that's not the thing. We're talking about financial institutions, but he's using a very strange term, DNA. And why? Because they don't want us to know what they're talking about, and because it's so monumental that if people figure out what they're talking about and who they're talking about before they're ready, that could cause issues. Not because they don't want people to become successful, but because sudden wealth syndrome is a really bad thing, right? I mean, I won't lie. If I had to come into a massive windfall from the 2017 bull run because I got invested in Bitcoin, even at the beginning of 2017 instead of midway through, that would have been there would have been a very different me today than the me sitting here on YouTube, talking about digital assets and XRP right now, right? And that's because sudden wealth syndrome kicks in when you accrue a large sum of money that you weren't expecting to get, that you weren't planning ahead to someday have to manage. And so you go and blow it. And a lot of times people end up dead when they do this. So it's really not good. It's really not a good thing to have happen, especially to a considerable amount of people who just catch on wise to something that's going on in the world. And that's why, I know that there's a lot of new people coming into the space, and that's why I'm creating the kind of content I am, to really try and help, jump people to the head of the line, closer to where I've managed to get myself over the last few years by, sharing my insights into how to be a rational operator within this space, and also how to, address blockchain as a technology, as a future of money, as a new way to live your own life through the gains that you can get from this if you are intelligent about your management of it, right? So to get back onto Mr. Hyun's point, though, this system is presenting problems that have been seen in the past, with traditional banks. And so, it's not as if there's not already regulatory clarity that we can just transpose from the traditional financial system onto this new financial system that's emerging. And so that should work nicely if you're, like he said, if you're doing banking, then you should be doing, then you should apply banking rules so that you have an even level playing field. And the same can be, and then I think he hasn't given his second point, so I just wanted to recap that and also provide a little bit of context for all of you out there, I guess. A little bit of a tangent, sorry.
Okay, so let's talk about China, Hyun. Big tech has been very active in China. How have regulators there handled these issues?
Yes, and China is a very good example of the first category, which is the new examples of the old type of financial stability concerns. So in China, big techs have entered the payment industry and now very well established in the financial system. And because the payment system is so closely integrated with the banking sector, there are clearly banking sector related issues which are tied up in an integral way with regulation of the payment providers. So what's happened in China is that the authorities have addressed what I refer to as the new versions of the old problems by introducing regulations where the payment firms are now required to clear their payments on a common public platform, which is more transparent. And there are also rules on instant redemptions from the money market funds that the payment firms offer, so as to minimize the impact on bank funding. So, as a general rule, if rapid structural change introduces new elements into the financial system, then regulation will have to be faithful to the spirit of the regulations rather than the letter. And so, when the system changes, you would need to amend the letter of the regulation so as to align the rules more together with the spirit.
So what he was really just talking about there is similar to what we covered in our May 31st review of the SEC panel in regards to blockchain regulations. And so what Mr. Hyun's saying here is, the regulatory framework that we apply, because this is a new, marketplace essentially, is going to have to. We're going to have to be lenient. The regulations that are the standardized regulations that are going to come out. Regulators need to understand that because this ecosystem is still maturing, therefore it's still changing and evolving, and we're seeing new use cases come about that we couldn't even have imagined. The regulations need to be, even when they're written out, they need to be followed from the perspective of fostering a healthy ecosystem, not simply following whatever those regulations are to whatever exact terminology is used at the time, because as this interview is showing, terminologies change all the time. The way that we use language changes all the time. If you're over 20 years old, you've probably witnessed the shift in how people have spoke throughout your life even, right? By the time you hit 30, it's so obvious because you're looking at young people, 20, 18-year-olds as a 30-year-old, and you're like, wow, these people don't even speak my language. I don't even know what the hell they're saying half the time. It's not that extreme, obviously, but there is a very subtle shift to how we use language, and it subtly changes throughout time. And that's why a lot of times nuances in law are lost as the years come on, It's because we forget what someone meant when they use a word in a certain way based upon the historical context. These are not things that we think about. Most people don't think about these things, at least during the time, and that's one of the reasons why it's so frequent for us to get into these bickering matches about ideologies of people long since past. And so what Hyun is saying here is that with that in mind, these regulations that are being proposed need to make sure that they're not going to stifle innovation. They're not going to slow innovation, right? Because that could be detrimental to our future economy that's going to emerge from this new field, this new marketplace. So, I guess we're almost done, right? I need to turn that off.
So you mentioned earlier new elements. What are the implications of this changing dynamic, and what does it mean for policymakers who've spent the last decade working hard to increase the stability of the international financial system?
Yes, and this is the really the much newer element, which is the DNA loop, the data network activities loop. Because these issues straddle traditional boundaries between financial regulation and competition policy, as well as data privacy. And the important implication is that we cannot apply a piecemeal approach to public policy towards big techs. We will need to take account not only of the traditional financial stability objectives, but also look at the issues of market dominance and the extent to which the DNA loop can lead to entrenched market incumbents and the lack of competition.
Okay,
so there needs to be focus as far as how to regulate DNA blockchain. Let's just stop calling it this DNA nonsense. Whenever you hear DNA or data network activities, he's talking about blockchain. I don't know why they think that they're going to keep this hidden from us by using these absurd terms. They keep changing every week. DTTF was the last one, data trust or data TT, whatever it is, something free flow, right? Data with trust flow, right? Whatever that nonsense was. They keep changing it up. They don't want us to know. And they're going to change it up as often as they can. So we got to be on top of these language shifts. But that's obviously what it is, because if you understand blockchain, you understand what we've been following, you hear exactly what he's saying. You're like, yeah, dude, thank you for telling all these people in here that don't understand the technical jargon. This is what they're saying, right? And that's why we do these things. So let's break this down. What did he just say? He said, well, we need to focus on the stability of this ecosystem. We have to ensure that this ecosystem is regulated in a way that, again, as I concluded on my previous, it's not going to cause systemic risks within the traditional financial system. We can keep a stable global system, and we need to ensure that within this new ecosystem that is emerging, we don't have the same issues arise that we are witnessing, tear our current system apart, and that is centralization of power within one particular ecosystem, right? And so that's not to say that you can't have a Google or a Facebook emerge within, the blockchain marketplace, but it's saying that if such a thing is going to emerge, as it almost certainly will, because that's how human nature works, we always gravitate towards the best, the one thing, the thing that's most popular, for whatever reason. That's just how we operate. And so when we go towards that, we need to make sure that that network is regulated in a way that ensures that it does not exclude competition, right? That new system that's coming about, it needs to be pro-competition. It needs to be super competitive. We want the very best to be the one that's going to rise to the top, right? As long as the very best rising to the top is not going to cause disruption to the rest of the system, that's how it needs to be. And so, yeah, that's ultimately what he was getting at from that point. So let's jump back into this next question.
To this end, in the report, you present what you call a new regulatory compass to help navigate this new aspect of the financial services market. Can you talk us through it?
Yes, and this is not the only way of doing it, but the way that we have laid out the compass is to lay out two dimensions. So one is the dimension over which it's a dimension that spans the range of choices over how much a new entry of big techs is encouraged or allowed into finance. And the other dimension is the dimension over which we deal with the different approaches to the treatment of data. And here the dimension is really about how much should you give the choice in the use of data to the users of data for them to find a decentralized solution, for example, by selling their data to other providers, Or do we need to impose some strict rules, what we call walls and limits on the use of data, so as to level the playing field in a more interventionist way? And we
Okay, I'm going to pause right there for a second because I want to touch the first part, which was incentivizing. What he's saying is, this is where things get interesting. Things have gotten interesting rather in this last statement, because previously we were speaking about how do we keep this stable, how do we keep it competitive, but now he's talking about incentivizing particular players within the ecosystem. And he's talking about also how to structure the finance flows that are going to occur within this ecosystem, within the blockchain networks. What I mean by finance flows is, with Brave, as you've seen twice in this video, I got 2 ads. I have them turned off now, so hopefully we won't get another one. Apologies again. But Brave pays me now for those ads that pop up. And so the little bling you hear is a Brave ad popping up, and it's paying me 5 cents or whatever it is per ad that I view. And they pop up every 20 minutes or so or whatever. And then, so the idea is that I'm being paid for those ads, whereas traditionally it was YouTube or Twitter or whoever is showing the ad that's being paid as you view it, right? So instead of Twitter, Facebook, whoever being paid for viewing the ads, you're paid for your attention to that ad. Now, this is detrimental to content creators such as myself, in the fact that now we are no longer able to monetize off of that ad revenue for our own content. But what it does do is it enables you as a content consumer to generate value from not just to gain cognitive value from whatever it is you're consuming, if it's something like this that's hopefully educational, but also from the monetary income that you're getting, as small as that is, that you're getting from the ad revenue, right? And so what that enables you to do then is what Brave has enabled, right? Where I can go in here, and if the Bank of International Settlements here was accepting, if they were registered with Brave, they could just click, send tip down at the bottom. I can't show you the tip at the bottom, but they could just click auto contribute or send tip, and then you, as the person who's getting a passive income from just using Brave browser for ads, are also then contributing directly to the content creators who you actually appreciate your value going to, right? And so that's how the idea though is that he wants to figure out, he's discussing, okay, is that system that I just broke down for you from Brave, is that a fair and balanced system? Is that going to incentivize the right parties to create a productive ecosystem? And I have a sneaking suspicion that traditional finance does not believe that to be the case. The reason I say that is because traditional finance is trickle down, right? They don't like the idea of trickle up, which is what Brave is, really, right? Because you're getting paid, pennies to consume ads, and you're paying pennies to anybody whose content you are agreeing to contribute to, since whatever, when you join that program on Brave. But those pennies add up, right? And so those who put the work in for those pennies are going to see those pennies turn into dollars from a large viewer base, right? So in my opinion, that's more stable, that's more fair, because it's, you don't want a pyramid that's top heavy. You want a pyramid, a triangle is powerful because it's balanced, right? It's stable. It has a strong base, and all the weight that is at the top is equally distributed amongst the lower parts as it goes down, right? That's why the pyramids, almost all of them are still standing. aside from the ones that got blown up or destroyed from war. These things aren't going anywhere from anything shy of a freaking earthquake opening up underneath of them, right? And a freaking fissure pulling it, making it drop into a new, crevasse or something. These things are crazy stable because they utilize that principle of the power of a triangle, right? So very important stuff to keep in mind in regards to where policy thinkers are at, policymakers are other thinkers, policymakers are at, and where these financial institutions such as the Bank of International Settlements are advising them to go, right? Now, again, Hyun didn't say that that's the side that he's on, but I have this fear of it just because that is the system that we're coming from, and he is still a part of that traditional system, right? Even though they are moving towards this blockchain revolution. So this video is already probably getting really long, so let's try and finish up the rest of this video, and then I'll do closing statements. Hopefully there's not too much dense.
We go through many different dimensions of that choice. Now it turns out that the way that we deal with data and the way that we deal with entry, they interact in very complex ways. And these are issues that span across different public authorities, so financial regulators, competition authorities, and data privacy regulators. So we need to think about this in a comprehensive way, in a joined-up way, and we need to have a much more a clear focus on the ultimate economic outcomes.
Facebook has just announced plans for its own digital currency called Libra. How does that fit into the issues we've been discussing?
It's still early days yet, and we need to learn more details. In the chapter, we discuss payment services like Alipay and WeChat Pay, which are account-based systems. What Facebook has announced is a digital token that is backed by conventional money. It's essentially a digital ledger that's updated to say who owns which token. And the ledger is updated by 2/3 majority voting by the members of this association that backs the venture. Now, this kind of arrangement is more often used for wholesale payments. And several central banks have experimented with this kind of digital token for interbank payments. Retail users would need another intermediary to access this kind of wholesale system, but we don't have much details on that. Now, what would be much more significant is a retail-oriented payment system based on apps that people use on a daily basis. The key question is how that kind of retail payment system would operate and how it would link to the Libra blockchain. Now, certainly, if we had a service like Alipay or WeChat Pay, but on a global scale, that would raise important questions on data privacy and anti-competitive practices that we discuss extensively in the chapter. And of course, these questions are even more important when there are cross-border transactions. As we say in the chapter, public policy needs to be aimed at achieving a level playing field.
So,
okay, I guess we're going to do one more pause there because there was a lot there in regards to Libra, right? And that actually kind of excites me. I expressed concerns before this question, but it kind of excites me at how concerned he seems to be in regards to Libra and Facebook. Facebook developing Libra rather, and how that can how that could be destabilizing to the traditional system, and thus it being of paramount importance for us to focus on not just how these payments are going to be facilitated through apps that everybody uses, Facebook or Instagram, WhatsApp, whatever your apps are that you use on a daily basis on your phone. Those apps are going to be integrated into the system, and what does that look like, right? How does that change how money operates, how we manage it in our lives, how it is distributed, right? And how do you tax all the new ways that money can move in this new environment? And what is that going to do to the traditional power structure now that we're seeing individuals like Facebook take this seriously, right? As he says, it's early days. The Libra token's not even released yet, But these are still that's why it's so important for us to ask these questions and try to come up with regulatory answers as quickly as possible before something like this Libra coin becomes publicly available. Something from one of these $500 billion companies becomes publicly tradable, right? Very important topics that are talked about in this, but as I've said multiple times over, it's just really dense. And the great thing about them going to LibraCoin is that this last little question really exposed the smoking gun that everything we've been talking about up to this point has actually been about blockchain, right?
But to conclude, Big Tech's entry demands a new and complex balancing act between financial stability, competition, and data protection. What lessons are we learning, and more importantly, where do we go from here?
I think the overarching lesson here is that big techs bring many benefits in terms of financial inclusion, but they raise difficult new challenges. Those challenges sometimes fall under traditional financial stability questions, but there are also new questions in competition and data privacy. So this is one area where public authorities, both within each jurisdiction and cross-border, will need to cooperate much more closely. This is very important because typically the financial regulators and competition authorities have followed rather different mandates. When we have to deal with big techs in finance, it's clear that public policy needs to be joined up, and policymakers will need to cooperate much more closely. On the international dimension, there will need to be much closer discussion among all the relevant policymakers, because the activities of big techs will straddle borders, and they will cover many different aspects of financial services, especially in the way that they interlink with the banking sector. And for all these reasons, the BIS is very well positioned to facilitate those discussions and to organize the thinking in a very structured way. And of course, we stand ready to play that role.
So, there you have it. That is the end of the interview with the head of research at the Bank of International Settlements, Hyun Song Shin. I hope you have enjoyed this review and breakdown of what he shared. As far as his closing notes, it was really just a recap of everything that we spoke about before. The importance of of coming to the table, discussing as a global community the appropriate measures to take in regards to regulating this brand new ecosystem that is challenging many conventional perceptions of finance and how it operates, how we as a global ecosystem engage with one another through commerce, through trade, right? So I hope you found this interview deeply enlightening. I know I found it fascinating, if nothing else, to hear how the Bank of International Settlements is posturing, how they are constructing their language, and how they're positioning themselves to really, as Mr. Hyun pointed out at the end of this, to become the International Bank of Settlements the Bank of International Settlements rather, hopes to become this central figure, this attractive body that pulls all the legislators and experts in finance together under their umbrella and says, all right, let's hash out these rules, right? Now, obviously, we know that these discussions are already happening at the G20 this year. We should be hearing. I can't wait till the end of next week when we really get all of our news in regards to what's what, right? It's going to be a fantastic week. I'm so excited. I can't wait to get into it with you guys this week in regards to everything that's going to be coming out. I'm sure it's going to be even more crazy than last week, right? So, with that said, I hope you've all enjoyed this. This is obviously going to be a bit longer than my traditional videos, but hey, it's Sunday. I figured I'd give you guys at least a decent sized video since this is going to be the only one I make. If you're new to my channel, please be sure to hit that subscribe. Also, don't forget to ring that bell. And if you really enjoyed this, don't forget that like as well, right? Thank you all for tuning in. As always, I've been Jade, you've been watching The Martian Report, and I can't wait to see all of you, my XRP Martians, in our next video on Mars.